clarification at any point?
Yeah, that'll be fine. We can be fairly relaxed about it, but hopefully I won't puzzle them too much. But, you know, obviously you make references to things that some people will never have heard of.
Yeah.
No matter how much you try to dumb down.
Okay. Goodness. Okay, so I think that we are more or less ready to go now.
Okay, I'll just replenish my water.
Okay, I'm going to introduce you whilst you're replenishing your water, Philip. Right, so yeah, welcome everybody. Good afternoon, good morning. Good afternoon, Philip. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone in Chile. Yeah, we've got a little bit of a treat for everybody today. Philip Terry will be talking to us from the University of Essex in the UK. I'm going to read a little bit of a bio from him. This is a really condensed biography because his achievements are innumerable and ever expanding, but there's just a few of them listed here. So Philip Terry was born in Belfast. He's a poet, a translator, and a writer of fiction. He's translated the work of Georges Perec, Stéphane Mallarmé, and Raymond Queneau, and he's the author of the novel Tapestry, which is shortlisted for the Goldsmith Prize. His poetry and experimental translations include Uli poems, I guess, Quenets, Dante's Inferno, and Dictator, which is a version of the Epic of Gilgamesh in Globish. He is currently translating Ice Age signs from the caves at Lascaux. The Penguin Book of Oulipo, which he edited, was published in Penguin Modern Classics, no less, in 2020. He's been doing a whole bunch of other stuff since then as well. But Philip, if you're ready, do you want to take the reins? I think that if anyone needs clarification or anything, or wanted to check out a reference or so on as we're going, please feel free to chip in the chat bar, and we'll try to attend to your queries as we go. But yeah, Philip.
Hello. Yeah, if you want to interrupt me as I go for clarification, please do so. Or there'll be time for questions at the end if you want to save up your questions for that. I'm gonna talk to you about Dante, and I'm going to talk to you about my engagement with Dante, which was kind of a rewrite or intervention on Dante, sort of up-to-date version of Dante. I'll explain that in a minute, but there's no PowerPoint, so I'm just going to talk to you, and when I read the poems you won't see them, you'll just have to hear them. But as at any poetry reading, you know, some things will enter your head and some things won't enter your head. That's normal. So you won't understand every word, but you will get a feel for what we're doing, hopefully. So hello, it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to Richard for asking me along. As I said, I'll be talking to you about Dante, and about how Dante, a writer from a very long time ago, the 13th and 14th centuries, to be precise, might still be relevant today, and how he might still be relevant to writing today as well. This year, 2021, marks the 700th anniversary of Dante's death, and there have been lots of events to mark the occasion in Italy, but elsewhere as well, all over the globe. Dante has a fairly globally known. Many of these events have been at pains to make a case for Dante's continuing relevance, and in this connection they have mentioned several aspects of Dante's work, from his formal inventiveness, so that his inventiveness as a poet, the verse form which Dante's commedia or divine comedy is written in is something called terza rima, which he actually invented for this book, though it's now well known. And it's the line endings all rhyme, but the pattern is A, B, A. So something like dog, cat, log, and then that A, B, A, you get 3 lines. The next 3 lines, which is a separate grouping, a separate stanza, will also have a similar pattern, But if the first is ABA, dog, cat, log, the second stanza, ABA, will take the cat as its first line. So it will be something like cat, room, and mat. So they all have that similar rhyming pattern, but they interlock. And could say more about that later, but let's not get stuck in that now. But it's a form of Dante's own invention. He invented for this poem. And people have also talked about the power of Dante's visual imagination. He's often called a very visual poet. And for that reason, he's gone on to inspire lots of other artists as well as writers ever since. So the 19th century English romantic poet William Blake, for example, did some fantastic illustrations to Dante's work. For me, two things stand out in this connection. Firstly, without Dante, we would not have the conception of hell. We all know, we can all think of something called hell. The modern conception of hell is, we wouldn't have it without Dante. He kind of invented it. And secondly, as well as imagining this bad place, hell, which we're familiar with today through a vast variety of dystopias, Dante imagined another place, paradise, in the third volume of his book, Paradiso. That is to say, he tried to imagine what a good place might look like, what a good future might look like. And for writers today, surrounded as we are by pandemics, by wars, and by environmental catastrophes, this is one of the most difficult, but also one of the most important tasks, to imagine goodness, to imagine a good future. And here Dante can help us. So in 2014, which is a few years ago now, I published a version of Dante's Inferno with a publisher in England called Carcanet. Among other translations, this book was unusual, if not eccentric, in that it relocated the action of Dante's poem to modern day England and Ireland, specifically Essex, which is where I'm talking to you from, the University of Essex in Essex, which is one of the counties of England, just north of London, really. It's a very flat place, as I will talk about that flatness later. This may seem a strange approach at first sight, but it's one which enables Dante to become more readable, at least I hope so, as his now forgotten contemporaries can be substituted for some of our own contemporaries. And it's also not without precedent in the history of translation. So back in the 14th century, in Dante's time, as a writer called Matthew Reynolds has noted in his study, The Poetry of Translation, we find that in the Wycliffe Bible, which is an early English version of the Bible, that the character Solomon translated Pharaoh's daughter from the city of David to the house he had prepared for her. So one of the earliest recorded meanings of the word translate, to translate then, is to shift places, to move somebody from one place to another, is to translate them. So in shifting Dante's action from Italy, from Tuscany to Essex and to Ireland, this version pays homage to this now forgotten sense of the word. The translation from the 13th and 14th centuries to the present, on the other hand, is inspired, at least in part, by Oulipo, the French ouvroir de littérature potentielle, or workshop of potential literature, specifically a method called Up to Date, which was first developed by Harry Matthews in his volume of poetry called Trial Impressions, first published in 1977. And he updates and otherwise metamorphoses stanzas from John Dowland's second book of Airs. John Dowland was a contemporary of Shakespeare. Dowland's poem, changed by Matthews and updated, declares undying fidelity in love. So it's a love poem about being faithful to his lover. And the first line of his poem is, "Dear, if you change, I'll never choose again. I'll always be faithful to you." Which Harry Matthews changes that to, If you break our breakfast date, I'll go begging in Bangkok. And so he goes on with the rest of the poem. So these methods of translation, what you might call topographical, changing the place, or what you might call transtemporal, changing the time, are surprisingly, in fact, very close to some used by Seamus Heaney in a poem of his called The Riverbank Field, from a 2010 collection called The Human Chain. I'll just read you a few lines from this. But he basically translates Virgil, the Aeneid, book 6, and he shifts Virgil's Italian topography to Ireland, to rural Ireland. And you can hear him talking about this here. Asked me to translate what Virgil gives as in a retired vale, a sequestered grove, and I'll confound Lethe in Moyola by coming through Back Park, down from Grove Hill, across Long Riggs, on to the riverbank, which way, by happy chance, will take me past the Domos Placidas, those perfect homes of Upper Brogue. Moths, then, on evening water, it would have to be, not bees in sunlight. So by changing, Virgil has these bees buzzing around in his poem in the sunlight, and Heaney says, you know, when he's walking around this place in Ireland, he's translated this to, there are no bees, but there are moths on evening water. So he takes the Virgil, something buzzing around and a place, and then changes it to his more familiar Moyola. So rather than shift Dante's action to rural Ireland like Heaney here, with Virgil, I chose to shift it to an environment familiar to me, which was rural Essex and the University of Essex, where I'm talking to you from right now. Why, you may wonder, why on earth should I shift the action from the 13th century to current day Essex? One starting point, bizarrely, was architectural. The University of Essex looks like a big concrete, slightly ugly, slightly 1960s sort of concrete place with very high towers. But the walled cities of Italian city-states in the Middle Ages, typified by cities like Monteregione, which has 14 high towers that stand on its perimeter like giant sentries. And Dante makes allusion to these in Canto 31 of Inferno, and they underpin the iconography and the architecture of the Inferno. These also, by happy chance and strangely, underpin the architecture of the University of Essex, where there are a number of towers surrounding a central campus with the lecture theatres and so on, divided up into squares, which are modelled on Italian campi, the origin of our world campus. So bizarrely, the architects of Essex University had these Italian cities, which were important to Dante, in mind when they built the place. Another was what I'd call psychogeographical. This takes its cue from a number of writers who were whose work involves revisioning mappings, remappings, and French writers called situationists, and writers and artists such as Rebecca Solnit and the Argentine Georges Mackey. And their work involves a sort of palimpsestic strategy, putting one thing on top of another, superimposing a map of one place on another. So I superimposed a map of Dante's Inferno on Essex University and the land around it. And as the work proceeded, these two maps, by twist and turn, sometimes guided by instinct, sometimes by pure coincidence, began to converge more and more. So Dante's Phlegathon, the river of blood, became the river which flows through Colchester, the River Colne, which runs through Colchester, a river which local myth claims had once literally run with blood when the Roman city of Colchester, the first Roman city in England, was sacked by Boudica, and she murdered all the Romans in a temple and burnt it down. There's a layer of architectural layer of soil in Colchester, which is just consists of lots of burnt ash and burnt bodies, called the destruction layer. And this is when Boudica killed all these Romans in revenge for the fact that they had humiliated her and they had raped her daughters. Dante's popes were replaced by ruling figures of universities, the vice chancellors, and at the suggestion of the poet Robert Shepherd, David Willett, who was then the Tory party government minister presiding over higher education. And he was instrumental in putting up tuition fees to £9,000 a year for students in England. Dante's suicides, whose souls are reborn as the seeds of trees, later to be preyed on by giant beasts called winged beasts called harpies, became the trees planted at Essex University to commemorate untimely student deaths, which, sad though it is, this happens every few years. The warring Guelphs and Ghibellines of Dante's Florence were replaced by the sectarians of Belfast, the Protestants and the Catholics of Belfast, my native city, and Virgil finally was replaced by one-time Essex visiting professor of poetry and a legendary presence on the New York poetry scene, Ted Berrigan, who, like the Latin poet, had imagined the underworld in his poem Memorial Day. Berrigan writes, "I heard the dead, the city dead, the devils that surround us." So here then is the opening of my version of Dante's Inferno, set on the campus at Essex, just outside the window of this room. I make reference to a stinking underground car park, and if I open my window now, you could get the smell of that, but it's just out there. It's a dark and gloomy place full of, you know, it's the underbelly of the university. It's the bit you don't show people visiting the university. It's full of bins and rubbish and smells coming out of the canteen and so on. So here, this is where the poet first meets the shade of Ted Berrigan. It's a bit wild, this opening, because I was still feeling my way into the poem. The bits I read you later are slightly more put together in a more reasoned way, but I still quite like this opening. But it should make sense. It's basically, it's in this car park, and there's a poet, and he comes across Ted Berrigan, who comes to his rescue. So Canto 1, halfway, just take a sip of water, and I'll read you this. It'll take about 3 minutes. So Inferno, Canto 1. Halfway through a bad trip, I found myself in this stinking car park, underground, miles from Amarillo. Students in thongs stood there, eating junk food from skips, flagmen spewing ease, their breath of fetid myrrh and rat's bane, donners and condemned chicken shin rose like distemper. Then I retched on rising ground, rabbits without ears, faces eaten away by myxomatosis, crawled towards a bleak lake to drink of leucotomy. The stink would revive a sparrow spread-eagled on a lectern. It so horrified my heart, I shat Botox. Here by the toxic water lay a spotted trout, its glow lighting paths for the vice-chancellor. And nigh the bins, a giant rat, seediness oozing from her Flemish paws, pushed me backwards, bit by bit, into square 5, where the wind gnaws and sunshine is spent. By the cash point, a bum asked for a light, hoarse from long silence, beaming. When I saw him gyrate, his teeth all wasted, natch, his eyes long dead through speed and booze, I cried out, "Take pity, whatever you are, man or ghost." "Not man, though formerly a man," he says. "I hail from Providence, Rhode Island, a Korean vet. Once I was a poet I wrote of bean spasms, was anthologized in fuck you. You're never Berrigan, that spring, where all the river of style freezes. I ask all over my facials. I'm an American primitive, he says. I make up each verse as it comes by putting things where they have to go. O glory of every poet, have a light. May my Zippo benefit me now and all my stripping of your sonnets. You see this hairy she-rat that stalks me like a pimp. Get her off my back, for every vein and pulse throughout my frame she hath made quake. You must needs another way pursue, he says, winking while I shade my pin. If you wouldst scape this beast, come, she lets none past her save the VC. If she breathes on you, your teaching nights. This way, freshman, come. If I'm not far wrong, we can find a bar and talk it over with Ed and Tom. So Ed and Tom, Berrigan takes the poet off to see Ed and Tom in the student bar. Ed and Tom are two other poets who were knocking around Essex in the 1970s. One of them, the American poet Ed Dawn, and one of them, the English poet Tom Rayworth. Where are we? So the other canto I'd like to read from this book, the Inferno, is Canto 19. And this is one I've already mentioned, where Dante punishes the popes of his day, which was an incredibly risky thing to do for Dante, especially as some of them were still alive, as he punished them in hell. And he punishes the popes who were guilty of the sin called simony. That is basically putting the accumulation of wealth before the spiritual goals of the church. So they were basically on the make. They were using the church for their own ends to live the high life and become very wealthy. So here, as I said, I punished the vice chancellors of British universities, including Manchester's John Brooks, who I'm told is a villain, and David Willits, the Minister for Higher Education. In Dante, this is set in a place he calls the Male Bolge, which literally means the evil pockets. I'll say a little more about that later, but and the evil pockets, these people are punished by being shoved into these pockets. And here it's relocated at the library at the University of Essex. This library is called the Albert Sloman Library, and and here I rechristen it as Al's Bulge, with a sort of sound homophonic reference to Male Bulge, Al's Bulge. It's just here. It's a big bulging concrete building. So that's a kind of echo or translation of Male Bulge, Al's Bulge, the Albert Sloman Library. So here we are, Canto 19. Quite heated, this one. There's people get a bit heated. There's some couple of rude words, but nothing too shocking. It's just, it gets very cross about these vice chancellors who, like the popes, are just interested in money. So Canto 19. David Willits, you wanker, and your shit-brained followers, pickpockets in silk suits who play the pimp with HE, which should be a right and free. Can you imagine being told, age 25, that you'd got cerebral palsy and the treatment would cost you an arm and a leg, but it's okay. You can defer payment, spread it over 20 years, no cause for alarm. Don't you ever stop to think? Now, in your honor, let the fire alarm sound, for it's here in Al's Bulge, the pits, as the students call it, that you and your kind hang out. Already we had stopped to spit on his statue when we began to make our way up a wide granite stairway. On the side wall, as we climbed, I noticed what at first I took for some weird art installation, something from the Latin American collection. Here, a series of round holes were punched into livid rock. They looked about as wide and as deep as a manhole, and from the mouth of each, a pair of feet stuck out, and legs up to the knee, and these were twitching frenziedly as if dancing to electropop like a robot from 1984, while on the soles of the feet a flame too danced as lit brandy on a Christmas pudding. I know what you're thinking, said Berrigan, my guide, but this is no surrealist montage. The feet you see sticking out of the wall belong to the vice-chancellors of the university. The rest of their bodies are stuffed inside. Who's that one, I asked. The one who's really going for it up ahead. If you really want to know, why don't you ask him yourself, said Berrigan. He can talk. When we reached the 8th or the 9th step where the stairs begin to turn to the left, we came up close to the cleft. Hello, I stuttered. I can only see your feet, but if you can hear me and still have a voice, speak. I stood like a holy man confessing some hardened assassin on death row who, strapped in his chair, calls him back to delay the moment of death. The feet stilled, then a voice came out, muffled but audible. Is that you on the stair, Riordan? Here already? The statutes were out by several years on your account. Are you so soon sated with that wealth for which you made no bones about seizing the university by deceit, only then to make havoc with her? I stood as one in negative equity, unsure how to understand what I heard and uncertain how to reply. Then Berrigan nudged me, saying, tell him you're not the one he takes you for. At which I stepped right up to the hole and did as he instructed. At this, the shade knotted his feet together, sighing in a labored fashion. Then in a voice which was half whining, he said, then what do you want of me? If you've trudged up these stairs rather than take the paternoster to know who I am, learn that I was once clothed in the great mantle, but beneath the finery I was greed incarnate, so eager to advance my own ends that up above I stuffed my pockets, and here I'm stuffed in one. I was the one who lobbied for top-up fees. I shut down any subject area that wasn't making a killing and encouraged those that would bring in cash. The Essex Business School was my brainchild. To the arts I was no friend. Under my head I stuffed all the others who came before me, money grubbers to a man cowering within the fissures of the rock. I too will go down there when the one I mistook you for retires, but already I've stood toasting in this undignified posture longer than he will, for after him from the north will come a ruthless shepherd who will liquidate all of the humanities, a man who will put our deeds in the shade. He'll be another John Brooks. If he doesn't shut you down, he'll either pension you off or make you work longer hours. He rambled on and on, like one who enjoyed the sound of his own voice and was used to his audience hanging on every word. Perhaps I spoke out of turn, but I answered him with what was upmost in my mind. While your salaries can be counted in hundreds of thousands, have you any idea how much we pay our teaching assistants? And do you know how much the cleaners earn, who even have to pay to park at work? Do you know what we pay poets? Stay stuck where you are, for you've got exactly what you deserve. Your avarice grieves the world, and your vision of a crestomathic university chained to markets and so-called creative industries leaves no room for thought and cares nothing for the rubbished margins of your success story. It's you and your like who have put the vice in vice chancellor. You should be ashamed. And as I ranted on at him like this, like I do when I'm completely pissed, whether it was through rage or because he had a bad conscience, his feet kicked out violently in the air. I think Berrigan dug what I said, for all the while he couldn't stop grinning. Then he gave me a big bear hug, crushing me against his broad chest and holding me like this. He lifted me up and didn't let go until we'd reached the top of the stairwell, where he put me down by a glass cabinet containing some pamphlets by Tom Rayworth, Lion, Lion, haiku from the Hungarian. Then after we'd looked at these for some minutes, Berrigan turned to me and said, "Let's split." So that's the end of that one. Okay. Okay, got a little exercise for you in a minute to break this up a little bit, and then I'll read you a little bit of the Purgatorio, which is a little bit happier. You find good people in the Purgatorio, whereas they're all completely horrible in the Inferno, with one or two exceptions actually. So one of the things that becomes clear in this canto, I think, is that Dante is a kind of satirist. So he attacks people who abuse their public office, for example, holding those who abuse public office in his day to account. So this is, I think this is interesting because it's not how we usually think of Dante. And it's another reason why his work is still relevant today. For if we still need satirists, we still need satirists today. And in a way, in translating this canto in the way I have, I'm kind of updating the satire, because the people who are abusing their position to make profit today are the prime suspects, are probably no longer the Italian popes, but you'll find them elsewhere in big business, basically. And one of the things that's happened to universities in Britain over the last decade is that they've become more like businesses than ever before. Obviously, one of the pleasures for me in writing this was to put people I didn't like in hell, which was a lot of fun. And I'd like you to now have your own go at this. So I want to pause for a few minutes now, and I want you to think of somebody you might put in hell. Who do you want to put in hell? What bad person can you think of who you don't like, who you would put in hell? So take a few minutes, make some notes, and I want to know, one, someone you would like to put in hell. Two, I want to know why. Why do you want to put them in hell? And three, what punishment you think they should have. So it's worth noting here that in Dante, the punishment always fits the crime, what Dante calls the contrappasso. So here the popes who in their lives stuff their pockets with money. In Dante, he goes into this place, the malebolgia, the evil pockets, and the popes themselves are stuffed into the ground in these holes like pockets. So the punishment kind of fits the crime. And I haven't invented that punishment. I've completely borrowed it from Dante and translated that intact. I'm just sticking different people in the evil pockets, vice chancellors, and so on. So one, someone you'd like to put in hell. Two, why? And three, what punishment do you think they should have? Does that make sense? Okay, so you can either tell me about this or you can put it in the chat, but I'm great. Thank you, Mariana Sanchez, saying it does make sense. So I'm going to give you maybe up to 5 minutes to gather your thoughts, and then I want you to tell me who's going in hell, why, and what's their punishment. Just see what you can make of that in a few minutes. Okay, hello again. That's about 5 minutes. So I wonder if, does anyone have any ideas? Someone you'd like to put in hell? You could put it in the chat, or you can speak up if you're feeling bold. Any ideas? Characters we could put in hell? There may not be people I've heard of, in which case you might have to explain.
Philip?
Yes.
I could jump in with one quickly whilst we're waiting for other people to step up.
Yeah.
I was thinking of putting Colin Graves in. Colin Graves, who was the previous head of the ECB, the English Cricket Board.
Colin Graves of the ECB. What's he done to offend you?
What hasn't he done, Philip? I would say, he was partly responsible for the culture which is going on at Yorkshire with the recent racism scandal at Yorkshire. This kind of that kind of general atmosphere there. He was also responsible for the founding of the 100.
Okay.
And for the general, worsening of the great English game of cricket.
So the 100 is a kind of commercialisation of cricket, isn't it? You know far more about cricket than I do.
That's exactly what the 100 is. Yeah, definitely. And a sidelining of many of the great traditions of our game. In terms of the punishment, I was thinking it might be nice to see him run through with some kind of a spit, or like a kebab, or some kind of something to go through, to pierce through him, because that kind of feels like something that he's done to the game. Or is the kind of the dividing that he does to people in the game. Maybe he could be chopped in half or something like this.
Okay,
that's a Dante kind of a thing. But that was what I was thinking.
That is a Dante thing. So one of the some of the people have been very divisive in their lives, and the character I do this to is Ian Paisley in Northern Ireland, who was a very divisive figure. Was Dante splits them in half, splits the head from the body. So that's very nice. Colin Graves.
Colin Graves. Maybe have we got some more kind of topographically specific to Chile examples from anyone? I'm sure people have them. I think people are maybe shy to come forward. Maria Jesus.
Okay, we've got. Is this from Jesus? Victor Frankenstein, for never taking responsibility of his actions. His punishment would be to be stuck, making the bride of his creature forever. So Victor Frankenstein, who creates the new creature from dead bodies and fails to take responsibility for his actions. That's a good one. And the punishment to be stuck forever, making the bride for his creature. So that it's kind of fitting punishment to be forever stitching this body together. Yeah, that's really nice. So that's a literary character. Aha. Thank you very much. Jesus.
Matthias, you got your hand up?
Yeah, this one's more topical, and I hope this doesn't go out to the press because I might be indicted. So Chile's president, Sebastián Piñera, for ignoring and actively harming, quote unquote, his people and stuffing his pockets. I wrote his punishment: pockets so swollen, legs are always about to break, and thighs are constantly chafing. So I mean, corruption, right? But also because of human rights violations, and this is just in direct reference to Chile's police actively pointing at protesters' eyes. I wrote, a bullet is stuck in his eye. It tries to go through constantly, but it just can't, you know, go to the other side. So it's a constantly rotating bullet in his eye, but it just can't go through. So
that's 2 punishments.
yes, it's 2 and 1.
Yeah, I think you've outdone Dante there, which is a hard thing to do, because Dante he does lots of strange things, and but I don't think he gives anyone 2 punishments. So those are both very fitting. So the first one are the pockets so full that they weigh him down and crush his legs.
And the thighs. Do not forget the thighs, chafing.
Crush his thighs. And the second one, this bullet that is forever passing through him. Yeah, those are wonderful. Politicians are always good people to look at if you want to find people who deserve to be in hell. You don't need to look very far in England to find similar figures in power. I
was going to say as well, because Pinheiro is always falling over on TV, right? He's always having these kinds of mishaps where he trips over and stuff like this. Is that a kind of a foreshadowing of this eternal punishment, Matthias, that we're already seeing?
I mean, you could say so. He's a very clumsy person when it comes to moving in general.
Okay, and I see from Catalina in the chat we have presidential candidate Cast. This is new to me, but you say he's aiming at reducing the rights of women, queer people, and other minorities. I think his punishment should be never-ending classes on gender and queer studies. What a brilliant punishment, where he is forced to pay attention. I'm sure he would enjoy that in no end, and it would do him good. Is Roccio, is it? In the chat, you've also got Donald Trump. Certainly, Donald Trump is a good candidate for the place he is hell. He's done so many bad things. What would you choose? His punishment in hell would be him not being able to talk. That's brilliant, because he can't stop talking, of course. Very good. No access to the internet. Yes. Well, he was banned from Facebook, wasn't he? And now he's set up his own social media company. I don't know how well it's doing. I hope it's doing badly, but yeah, Donald Trump is certainly. When I wrote my Inferno, nobody had heard of Donald. Well, I hadn't heard of Donald Trump. Although if I was writing it now, he would be in there for sure. Yeah, those are some nice examples. We could go on, but having his Twitter banned would certainly be hell for him. I would agree. So I'll finish off then. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts, which are really great. I'll finish off by just saying a little bit about Dante's Purgatorio, which is a little bit nicer place than the Inferno. So this contains saved characters, but flawed characters who are here made better. If I got my camera on, I have. Yeah. So when it came to translating the Purgatorio in a similar way, for me, things became a little bit more difficult. At once I realized that while it was relatively easy to find contemporary equivalents for the villains in Inferno, the more positive emphasis of Purgatorio, where Dante begins to imagine a better world, was more of a challenge. We live in a culture more at home with dystopias than with utopias. Another challenge, as my version was set in Essex, was the inescapable fact that the island of Purgatory in Dante is a big tall mountain, a very high mountain with a big peak. And Essex, where I'm set here, is flat. It's very flat. There are no mountains, very few hills in Essex. I resolved this by cheating, really. I set the action on Mersey Island, which is not far from here. Essex does have islands, so that was okay. The Purgatory is an island that is a mountain. So I set it in Mersey Island, and then I put Mersey Island in a parallel world where people I call climate artists have constructed a mountain on Mersey using something called flexible rock substitute, or FRS, which is a kind of rubbery rock kind of stuff. And the island metamorphoses into a kind of nature park with a visitor centre and walks of various difficulty and so forth. So once this problem had been resolved, though there were others, things began to fall slowly into place. So I was able, as with Inferno, to begin to find contemporary equivalents for Dante's characters. In Canto 1, where the pilgrims first arrive on the island, they're greeted in Dante by a classical figure, Cato, but in mine they're greeted by a character called Ronald Blythe. Ronald Blythe is a quite famous local writer and a lay preacher, and he's the author of a book called, quite a famous book in England called Aikenfield, which was written about, it was written about a village in the country which still had a very traditional way of life. So a very small school with about 10 people in it and blacksmiths and stuff like this. So Ronald Blythe is the person who greets people when they arrive in the island. Canto 20, where we encounter the souls of the avaricious, the greedy, whose punishment or purgation is to crawl face down on the ground, biting the earth. Dante's Hugh Capet, who established the Capetian dynasty, is one of these characters who gives a long speech in Dante. This character was replaced by John Paul Getty, the man who established the Getty oil dynasty. So a kind of slightly arrogant and avaricious figure who is forced to crawl on the ground. So to give you one example of how this all works in practice, I'll read Canto 10. This is the first canto which takes place in Purgatory proper, after the pilgrims pass through a place called Anti-Purgatory, sort of pre-Purgatory. And here we come across examples of humility, people who are humble and kind. And these are the examples are all taken from contemporary culture. Before we then encounter the punishment of those who are proud. So Dante pairs the humble and the generous with the proud as kind of opposites. In Dante, the proud figures carry huge slabs of stone on their backs as they're weighed down. The opposite of pride in a way. In my version, they do something very similar, but they carry washing machines, big washing machines on their back. So it's a slightly René Magritte-like image, slightly surrealist image. The logic of my washing machines only becomes clear in the next bit of the poem, the next canto, where one of Dante's characters was called Odorisi, who was famous for illuminated manuscripts, and I replaced Odorisi with an English artist, the artist Damon Hirst. Damon Hirst, famous for among other things, his spin paintings, where he puts paint on a bit of revolving paper and spins it. And that gave me the idea of the washing machines, which also spin, yeah. And so and also I was able to find a washing machine called an avant-garde, the Siemens avant-garde washing machine. So Damon Hirst, in a bit I won't read you, is carrying a Siemens avant-garde, which I'm sure he'd appreciate. Anyway, Canto 10, I'll read you this, and then I'll stop and we can have some questions if you're not exhausted by then. So Canto 10, when we passed through the turnstile that remains forever shut to souls who think only of self and make the crooked way seem straight, I heard it lock fast again with a clunk. My instincts made me want to look back, but I checked myself just in time. We found ourselves mounting a narrow cleft in the rock, which kept undulating from side to side and up and down like a wave that swells and pulls back. When Berrigan, my guide, began, "Careful, you don't want to lose your footing. Move with the walls, hugging the side that appears to pull back. This may look like rock to you, but it has the properties of rubber. It's what the architects of this island call FRS, flexible rock substitute. It's one of the security features designed to arrest the progress of those who come through the turnstile uninvited, though you'd think they could switch it off for the likes of us." Let's go. It's making me feel kind of queasy. The turbulent motion of the FRS forced us into taking ever smaller steps, so that the already waning moon had sunk completely out of sight before we were finally squeezed out of that rubber cleft. When we were free of its grip at last and emerged once more into the open air, where the high mountain towered above us, both tired out and uncertain of our way, we stopped for a breather on a level shelf, lonelier than our roads through war-torn wastes. From the ledge, which is the edge of emptiness, to the foot of the perpendicular rock face, there was space for 3 coffins laid end to end. As far as I could see, looking ahead, both to my left and to my right, the ledge did not vary in its width, and standing there, getting our breath back, I noticed that all the inner cliff, which rising sheer offered no foothold to the climber, was covered over with intricate carvings. These, said Berrigan, according to the guidebook, were executed by the artist in residence, Grayson Perry, cut into the raw rock face with lasers. The rock was so cluttered with carvings that at first it was difficult to make them out, but as I looked more closely, individual scenes emerged. There was a scene outside a country home where an old man with a walker made circuits of his house that in its expert execution recreated the effect of slow movement. From the medals on his chest, I saw now that this was Captain Tom Moore, who raised money for the National Health Service before his 100th birthday. Beneath, a text read, "I never thought I'd raise so much." Another scene close by showed Captain Tom meeting the Queen, humbled by the encounter. Then beside this, another image showed Captain Tom lying in a hospital bed with an oxygen mask, dying from COVID-19. A nurse sat at his side, weeping. "Why don't you look at the other parts too?" said Berrigan, who stood close by me. And so I turned my eyes and looked ahead past the nurse's crouched form to the place he was pointing at, where I saw other scenes cut in the rock. Carved in the sheer face of the rock, I saw depicted there a Hell's Angel with death or glory tattooed on his arm, who had just pulled up his Harley onto the pavement to help an old lady who had fallen off her mobility scooter. I saw the CEO of a big city bank handing back his bonus, and a rock star who was unstrapping his guitar to hand it over to one of his fans from the crowd, who proceeded to improvise an impromptu solo. And above him, there was a footballer. Was it David Beckham, who was kicking a ball around with a group of laughing boys in an African refugee camp? Then a little further on, I saw President Obama at the funeral service for Reverend Clementa Pinckney, one of the 9 killed by Dylan Roof in the Charleston massacre, singing Amazing Grace with the whole congregation, testing my senses, one of which said no, while the other said yes. They truly sing. With equal art, the tears which some wiped from their eyes were traced so faithfully that you would have sworn the rock had turned to water. I shifted off from that spot to observe more closely other stories likewise lasered in the rock. I made out clearly the face and hands of Pope Francis, Bishop of the slums, washing the feet of kids hooked on Paco. I saw Nelson Mandela ushering a chambermaid out of his hotel room as he bent to make his own bed. And as I stood there gawping at these jostling humilities and wondering at the artistry, look, over there, how slowly they approach, that crowd of spirits, said Berrigan. They will show us the way to the stairs. My eyes, caught up in their wonderment, were eager for new sights, so I was not slow to turn them towards him. Reader, when you see how these spirits pay their debts, don't lose heart even if their punishment seems harsh. Remember, this is not like hell, where the torment never stops. Here, the spirits are all intent on finding a better way, building a better world. Master, the shapes I see lumbering towards us, there, I said, don't look like spirits at all. I don't know what to make of them. They look more like some kind of care robots or androids. And Berrigan answered me, the grievous nature of their punishment bends their bodies down to the ground. At first, I wasn't sure what to make of them myself. Concentrate, try to disentangle with your eye what moves beneath those heavy loads. Can you see now how each one beats their breast? Oh, stupid brains, happy to puff up your egos endlessly by massaging your credit ratings, pouring your energies blindly into the pursuit of accumulating smart gadgets and consumer goods and cars too big to even fit on the roads. Do you not understand that alone we remain like larvae, but that together we could be butterflies that soar into the air in clouds of light? Sometimes in a country church, you see a corbel carved in human form, taking the weight of the high roof, its chest crushed tightly down against its knees, and so lifelike is this jeu d'esprit that it can cause physical discomfort, even in the most casual churchgoer. This is how those souls appeared and how they made me feel, crushed as they were like salesmen beneath the weight of the washing machines that straddled their backs. True, some of them were more compressed, some less, depending on the specifications of the appliance that pressed on each one's back, but even the most patient of them all seemed through tears to say, I can't go on. That's the end of that. Thank you very much. And now, I don't know if we have time for questions. Over to you, Richard.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Philip. It was great to hear a little bit of Purgatorio there. I think we are a little bit over time, but I reckon we do have time if people have a minute just to throw a couple of questions your way, if we can. So does anyone have anything that they'd like to run by Philip at this stage? You can jump in on the microphone, put your hand up, or in the chat bar, however you want. That would be fine. Anyone want to raise anything? Comments, questions? I mean, I just wanted to say, just whilst people are gathering themselves. Oh, Francisca's jumped in. I'm going to keep mine in abeyance for a second. Francisca, you mentioned the importance of satire in Dante's work as one aspect that makes it still so relevant. Do you believe that satire is under attack because of cancel culture, as is so frequently discussed today?
There's certainly some truth in what you say. I'm not sure I could analyze that particularly well off the top of my head, but satire can be kicked into touch or stopped by cancel culture to some extent, because I suppose satire is always taking risks in who and what it mentions, and where there's no platform, there is no platform with satire. But I think you do still see satire taking place, but perhaps less so than once. I don't know. What do you think, Richard?
I mean, the world, which is a world of conceptual art projects and funding applications and so on in Purgatorio, feels like a place which would have one ear to those kinds of sensitivities, which would be affected one way or the other. I mean, I can readily imagine those as well in Inferno as well, those vice chancellors twisting a kind of a perceived attack of cancel culture in a way which probably speaks more to their cultural positions than any reality about what's going on with the so-called cancel culture. Yeah, but it feels like it would fit to the satirical realm somehow.
Yeah, yeah. I think, of course, satire depends. It's depends where you make it. I mean, if you're being satirical in a newspaper or on television, you occasionally have to be careful. Politicians, certainly in Britain, are usually seen as fair game for satire. So you get a lot of cartoons in newspapers that are extremely insulting to people like Boris Johnson, satirizing Boris Johnson, who is just a, complete, careerist who wants to make a lot of money and then push his career forward by becoming prime minister, but he has no idea what he's doing. And 200 people are dying a day here as I speak because of his shameful neglect. But so that's a very good question. Hard to answer, but I think certain subjects are still one is able to satirize. I think perhaps in poetry because it has a small readership, you can say more than you can say in certain other forms.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask Philip. Dante was famously buffeted on the real life streams of politics in his day, and what maybe the stakes are not quite Gelson and Ghibellines in your work, but you are nonetheless an employee of one of the institutions that you satirize. Do you feel that there is any real life political danger to you or political consequences to you from any of this?
I think there was a degree of danger. There was a little frisson when this came out in the university, and there were certain people who read it and were appreciative of it. There were other people who I don't know and I don't know who they are, but I suspect they work in marketing and things like this, who would have Googled Essex University and come across my book. And I think they would have read it. And whereas I say there are some great things about the university, we've had some great people working here in the past and great students who have gone on to do things. One of them became a Mexican astronaut once, went to Essex University. There are some things I would criticize about it, including its running it as a business. And these people who didn't like what I was saying certainly brought the poem to the attention of the Vice Chancellor, who has read it and talked to me about it. And he didn't mention it directly, but he mentioned some of the points of view in it. He said, I agree with you that it was a mistake to raise student fees to £9,000 a year, but that's happened. There's nothing we can do about it. Of course, it's not me in the poem saying that, it's somebody else. Everyone in the poem is a character, but one doesn't expect vice chancellors to understand poetry, perhaps. But my poem was brought to the attention of the vice chancellor by people who didn't mean me well, put it that way. But I was all right. Nothing happened. I'm still employed, but I suppose there was a certain danger. But you've got to speak your mind, haven't you? And sometimes that does involve a limited amount of danger. But there's nothing better than for a poet to become a cause célèbre, but that didn't happen. It would have happened if I was sacked, but no. I hope that answers your question.
Fantastic, thanks for that. I think we've got time for one more. If anyone wants to fire one over at us, what are we thinking? Any other thoughts from anyone? Rocio. I don't know if it's silly, but do you think that Dante's aim, coming from a undergraduate student, is to get his degree? Could that be the equivalent of entering paradise? What do you reckon, Philip?
Could getting a degree be the equivalent of paradise? I think Dante was certainly in favour of an equal spreading of knowledge around people. So Dante would have been in favour of universities and an education. I think if you get a degree that allows you to do something good with it, to run an ethical business or to do something about climate change, I think Dante would be cheering you on from the touchline. I think universities are here to teach people, and I think to make the world a better place and to send people out to do good things in the world. I would hope so. I think there's an analogy there. Yeah, Why not? Maybe it's more purgatorial doing a degree than an entry into paradise, but it's a fair point. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that.
Thanks you.
Rocio and Philip. I think we're we run out of time really now. But
Okay.
thanks so much once again, Philip, for everyone here for your time today. Super interesting talk for us, and I think we've got a lot out of it. Thanks once again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the invite, and thanks to everyone for listening. Thank you for your great questions. Nice to be with you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Philip.
Thank you. Do we just leave now, Richard?
I think so.